When Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves were seen together, the night was calm, but the city was alive with its usual noise. Flashing lights, car horns, and voices filled the streets. Yet in one corner, something different was about to happen. Something that would leave people talking for days. It was not a red carpet event, not a film set, and not a press conference. It was just two people walking quietly side by side. And those two people were Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. Paparazzi had been scattered across the city, waiting for a story, searching for that one perfect picture that could tell 1,000 words. They never expected this. Their cameras suddenly lit up the dark street like lightning. The sound of clicking shutters echoed as they caught sight of Sandra and Keanu. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The two stars who had once captured hearts on screen were now standing in real life, sharing something unspoken, something raw and real. What struck everyone most was not their fame, but their faces. Sandra looked tired, her eyes carrying the weight of unspoken feelings. Keanu walked close to her, calm and steady, his presence like quiet strength beside her. There was no glamour, no staged smiles, only honesty. And honesty has a way of shaking people more than any performance. The first few photos spread quickly, flashing across screens, igniting whispers everywhere. Are they together again? What happened between them? Why do they look so emotional? The questions kept coming, but no one had the answers. What the world saw was not just two actors, but two souls who seemed to be holding on to each other through invisible threads of pain and hope. As the cameras followed, Sandra slowed her steps. Her hand brushed against Keanu's arm almost unconsciously, as if she needed assurance. Keanu glanced at her, his eyes calm but deep, like he understood more than he said. He didn't speak much. He never did. But in that silence, there was comfort. Sandra's lips trembled slightly, and for a moment, she looked like she might break. But she didn't. She stood tall because beside her was someone who reminded her that she was not alone. The night continued, but the air had changed. People nearby felt it too. Strangers who happened to be there stopped to watch quietly, sensing something sacred. It wasn't about Hollywood, it wasn't about fame. It was about resilience, about kindness, about the quiet strength that people sometimes forget still exists in this noisy world. Here were two human beings, both scarred in different ways, finding a moment of peace together. What no one knew was what led them to that street. Sandra had been carrying pain for weeks. She had lost someone close, and the grief was heavy. She had tried to keep it private, but sorrow has a way of showing itself in the eyes, no matter how hard you try to hide it. Keanu, who had carried his own losses in silence for years, understood grief better than most. He had seen it, lived it, and survived it. When he heard about Sandra's pain, he didn't send flowers. He didn't write a message. He simply showed up, because sometimes presence is the most powerful gift of all. As they walked, Sandra whispered something, her voice low and uneven. The cameras couldn't catch it, but Keanu's soft nod told everything. He listened, and he understood, and that was enough for her. The world around them could judge, could gossip, could twist the story in 100 different ways, but in that moment, it was just about two hearts that recognized each other's scars. What made this night unforgettable was not just the sight of them together, but the truth behind their quiet steps. It was a story of humility, of respect, of resilience in the face of loss. It was about kindness that expected nothing in return, and about finding light even when the night seemed endless. The paparazzi thought they had captured a scandal. Instead, they had unknowingly captured a moment of human connection that was far deeper than headlines could ever explain. The real story was not about fame. It was about compassion. And compassion, when seen in its purest form, has the power to move even the coldest hearts. And as the night went on, The story of Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves walking together was only just beginning. Whispers in the night. The photographs from that night spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours, the internet was flooded with images of Sandra and Keanu walking side by side under the dim glow of street lights. Some people smiled when they saw the pictures, some felt confused, and others began to whisper about secrets they believed were hidden in those quiet steps. But what the pictures could never capture was the storm of emotions that lived inside Sandra's heart. By the next morning, Sandra sat by her window, staring out at the city that had suddenly turned, its eyes toward her. She held a cup of coffee, but it had grown cold in her hands. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages, headlines, and calls. Friends wanted to know what had happened, reporters wanted statements, and strangers wrote words filled with curiosity or judgment. Yet none of them truly understood. Behind those photographs was a grief so heavy that Sandra sometimes wondered if she could carry it another day. Keanu, meanwhile, stayed silent. He didn't call the press, didn't respond to questions, didn't make any statements. He had lived long enough to know that silence speaks louder than words when the truth is sacred. Instead, he drove quietly to Sandra's home that morning. No cameras followed him there. No one knew that while the world was busy speculating, he was sitting in her living room, listening to her broken voice as she tried to explain the pain that had been eating away at her. "I don't know how to go on," Sandra whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Everything feels empty." Keanu leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "I know that feeling. I've lived with it too. But you don't have to go through it alone. Sometimes the weight doesn't disappear, but it becomes lighter when someone else helps you carry it." Those words touched her deeper than anything else could have. She remembered the tragedies Keanu had survived, how he had always kept his dignity, how he never let bitterness consume him. His kindness wasn't loud, it wasn't for show. It was simple, real, and steady. And in that moment, she realized why the sight of him walking beside her had felt so powerful. He wasn't just there, he understood. Still, outside their walls, the world was restless. The paparazzi had camped near her home, waiting for another glimpse, another picture, another moment to turn into gossip. Neighbors watched quietly, torn between curiosity and respect. And in the middle of all this noise, Sandra felt trapped. "I can't step outside," she said softly, her voice breaking. "Everywhere I go, there will be cameras waiting. They don't see me as a person right now. They see me as a story." Keanu nodded slowly, then suggested something unexpected. "Then let's give them a different story. Not one of sadness, not one of brokenness, but one of strength. If they're going to look, let them see you standing tall. Let them see resilience." His words sparked something inside her. She had spent days hiding from the world, afraid that her grief made her look weak. But maybe there was strength in showing her scars openly, in letting people see that even stars could hurt and still keep walking. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Sandra agreed to step outside again. Keanu walked beside her, just as he had the night before. But this time, there was a difference. The cameras flashed once more. The questions shouted from every corner. But Sandra didn't look down. She held her head high, her steps slow but firm, and with Keanu's calm presence beside her, she radiated a quiet resilience that no headline could twist. Onlookers noticed the change. Even the paparazzi, who had come only for a scandal, felt something shift in the air. Behind their flashing cameras, a few of them lowered their voices, almost as if they sensed they were capturing something too sacred to exploit. As they walked, Sandra whispered to Keanu, "Why are you doing this for me?" He looked at her gently, his voice steady. "Because once, I wished someone had done it for me. Because kindness is not about what we get back. It's about what we choose to give." Those words sank deep into her soul. She realized that what she was experiencing was not just friendship. It was a rare kind of kindness, the kind that asks for nothing in return, but gives everything it has to offer. That night, when she finally returned home, she looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were still tired, her heart still heavy, but she saw something new: strength. Not the kind that roars loudly, but the kind that whispers in silence and survives storms. The story was no longer just about two stars being spotted together. It was about the unseen battle of grief, about the courage to walk through pain instead of running from it, and about the healing that comes when someone chooses to stand beside you. And yet, this was only the beginning. Neither Sandra nor Keanu knew that the days ahead would test them even more. Because when compassion meets the cruel light of the world, the journey is never easy. The storm behind the cameras, the morning after Sandra and Keanu stepped out together again, the world woke up to headlines that seemed louder than the truth itself. Are they in love? A secret reunion? Grief turns to romance? The media twisted what little they had into stories that sold, ignoring the real heart of the moment: two people finding strength in kindness. For Sandra, it felt like living inside a storm. She sat at her kitchen table with her phone buzzing, nonstop. Every screen she opened showed her face. Every voice on the television had an opinion. Some spoke gently, others mocked, but all of them forgot she was human. The weight of grief was already heavy, but now she had another burden: being misunderstood by millions. Her heart whispered, "Why can't they see the truth? Why can't they see that I'm just trying to heal?" Keanu, however, was calm. When he arrived at her home that day, he found Sandra pacing, restless and anxious. She looked at him with wide, tired eyes. "They're making stories about us," she said, her voice breaking. "They think this is about love, about drama, about Hollywood. But it's not, Keanu. It's about survival for me. I can't take this noise anymore." Keanu listened without interrupting. His silence wasn't empty. It was a space for her pain to exist without judgment. Finally, he spoke in that gentle way of his. "The world sees what it wants to see. We can't change every voice out there, but we can choose how we carry ourselves in the middle of it. You're stronger than they think, Sandra. Don't let their noise drown out your truth." His words felt like a rope thrown into stormy waters. Sandra clung to them. She realized that while the headlines were loud, the moments she shared with Keanu were quiet, real, and unshakable. Still, the storm outside grew. Paparazzi swarmed near her home. Helicopters circled above, and strangers camped on sidewalks just for a glimpse. Inside, Sandra's walls began to feel like a cage. That night, unable to bear the weight, she whispered to Keanu, "Let's leave, just for a little while. Somewhere without cameras, somewhere I can breathe." Keanu nodded. "Then let's go." And so, without announcing it to anyone, they slipped away under the cover of night. Keanu drove his old motorcycle, the one he loved because it gave him freedom from everything artificial. Sandra sat behind him, holding on to him tightly, the wind rushing past her face as the city lights blurred behind them. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of release. They rode for hours until the streets turned into quiet roads, and quiet roads turned into open countryside. Finally, they stopped near a small lake hidden from the world. The moonlight touched the water, and silence stretched across the night sky. Sandra stepped off the bike, her hair loose in the wind, her face lit by silver light. She looked at the calm lake and whispered, This is what I needed." Keanu joined her, his hands tucked in his pockets. "The world doesn't know how to be quiet anymore," he said softly. "But we can still find our own silence." Tears filled Sandra's eyes, not from pain this time, but from relief. She sat by the water, hugging her knees, letting the cool breeze touch her skin. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. Keanu sat a few feet away, not too close, not too far, giving her the space to feel but reminding her that he was still there. After a long silence, Sandra spoke, her voice fragile but steady. "I thought grief would destroy me. But maybe it's teaching me something. Maybe it's teaching me who really matters, who will stay when everything else falls apart." Keanu looked at her, his eyes calm and deep. "Loss doesn't take away love. It just changes how we carry it. The people we lose stay alive in how we choose to live." Those words pierced through her heart. She realized he wasn't only speaking to her, he was speaking from his own scars. And in that moment, she understood him more than ever. But even as they found peace by the lake, the storm outside continued to grow. Back in the city, rumors exploded. Some claimed they had seen them run away together. Others invented wild stories of romance and secret plans. The media machine had turned their private pain into entertainment. Yet none of those stories captured the truth. The truth was far more powerful. Two people, both carrying wounds, finding courage in silence and kindness in each other. As dawn approached, Sandra leaned her head back against the grass, watching the first light of morning paint the sky. For the first time in a long while, she whispered to herself, "I can face this. I'm not alone anymore." But what neither she nor Keanu knew was that the biggest test of their resilience was still ahead, because the world, restless and hungry, was not done with them yet. When silence turned into a storm, the sunrise over the lake was soft, golden, and almost unreal. Sandra closed her eyes and let the warmth of morning touch her face. For a few precious hours, she had forgotten about the cameras, the headlines, and the endless noise. But peace never lasts long when the world is watching. As she and Keanu rode back toward the city, she felt her chest tighten. She already knew what was waiting for them. And she was right. The moment they crossed into familiar streets, the silence shattered. Cars followed them. Flashes from hidden corners burst like lightning, and the sound of voices calling their names grew louder and louder. By the time they reached her home, the sidewalks were crowded with reporters, fans, and curious onlookers. Microphones pushed forward, questions shot like arrows. "Sandra, are you and Keanu together?" "Keanu, is this love or just friendship? Why did you leave the city last night?" The noise was relentless. Sandra froze. Her grief had been heavy, but now she felt exposed, like every step she took was being measured, judged, and twisted into something it was not. She wanted to run back to the lake, to the silence that had healed her, but running was no longer possible. Keanu stepped forward, shielding her with his calm presence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight the reporters. He simply stood between Sandra and the chaos, his body a quiet wall of protection. His eyes scanned the crowd, steady and firm, and somehow, even without speaking, he made people hesitate. Sandra whispered, almost trembling, "I can't do this anymore." Keanu turned his head slightly toward her. "Yes, you can, but you don't have to do it alone. We'll face them together." That sentence carried her through the chaos. They moved carefully, step by step, until they were finally back inside her home. Once the door closed, Sandra collapsed onto the couch, tears slipping down her face. "They won't stop, Keanu," she cried. "They're turning my pain into their entertainment. I just wanted to heal. I just wanted to live quietly." Keanu sat beside her, not touching her at first, letting her cry. Then, when her sobs grew softer, he spoke in his calm, grounded voice. "When the world tries to write your story, you have two choices. Let them own it, or tell it yourself. Your pain is real. Your strength is real. If you speak your truth, Sandra, you take the power back. People can't twist what comes straight from your heart." Those words settled into her mind like seeds waiting to grow. For the first time, she thought. Maybe she didn't have to keep hiding. Maybe her grief could be more than a private battle. Maybe it could be a message, a reminder that even stars, even people who seem untouchable, hurt just like everyone else. The next day, Sandra made a bold decision. She agreed to attend a charity event that had been planned weeks before, but which she had been ready to cancel. The cameras would be there. The whispers would follow. But she wanted to walk into that room not as a broken soul hiding behind closed doors, but as a woman choosing to stand tall despite her scars. When the night of the event arrived, the atmosphere was electric. Bright lights, red carpets, and endless reporters filled the space. Whispers spread quickly as Sandra arrived in a simple, elegant dress. Keanu walked beside her, not for attention, but as her steady anchor. The cameras exploded in flashes, louder and brighter than ever before. Reporters leaned in, desperate for a story. Sandra paused at the edge of the carpet. For a moment, fear threatened to swallow her whole, but then she remembered Keanu's words. "Tell it yourself." She lifted her head, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "I know many of you have questions," she said, looking straight into the cameras. "This past month has been one of the hardest of my life. I've lost someone close to me and the grief has been overwhelming. I never asked for this attention, but I know I cannot hide forever. What I want to say is simple. Pain is real. Healing is slow. But kindness is powerful. I am grateful to have friends who remind me that even in the darkest moments we are not alone." The room fell silent. Even the reporters, trained to dig for drama, paused. Her words carried weight because they were not rehearsed, not polished for Hollywood. They were raw, human, and filled with truth. Keanu stood a step behind her, silent. As always, his presence like a shadow of strength. He didn't need to speak. His support was visible in the way he stood beside her, calm and unshaken. The whispers that followed were not the same as before. Yes, some still twisted her words, but many began to see the truth. People across the world shared her speech online, not as gossip, but as inspiration. Even stars feel pain. Sandra Bullock speaks about resilience. Keanu Reeves shows what real friendship looks like. For Sandra, that night was a turning point. She realized she didn't have to let the world decide her story. She could choose how to face it. And though the road ahead would still be hard, she no longer felt powerless. But even as the night ended with quiet hope, a new challenge was already forming. The storm had not disappeared. It was only shifting. And what came next would test both Sandra and Keanu in ways they never expected. The breaking point, the charity event, had been a turning point, but it was also the beginning of something more complicated. Sandra's words had touched millions, yet the world does not always honor honesty. With every message of support came another headline filled with suspicion. Some praised her courage, while others accused her of using grief for attention. And Keanu, by standing beside her, was pulled into the storm more than ever. The pressure was growing heavier every day. Sandra noticed it in the way reporters camped outside her home, in the endless buzzing of her phone, in the way strangers looked at her in public with both admiration and judgment. It was suffocating. But what frightened her most was the shadow she began to see in Keanu's face. He had always been calm, steady, unshaken. But now, she noticed the weariness in his eyes, the way he avoided public places, the way he fell silent for longer than usual. One evening, as they sat in her living room with the blinds drawn, Sandra finally asked, "Is this too much for you?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor, his hands clasped together. Finally, he said softly, "I've lived with shadows before. I know how they follow. I wanted to protect you from them, but maybe I've pulled you into mine instead." Her chest tightened. "No, Keanu. You've been the only light in this whole nightmare. Without you, I don't know if I'd even be standing right now." He gave her a small, tired smile. But what if my presence keeps the storm alive? What if the cameras don't stop because they're waiting for us together? That thought pierced through her. For the first time, Sandra wondered if his kindness, the very thing that had saved her, was also the reason the noise refused to fade. She hated the thought, but deep down, she knew the headlines were louder because they were side by side. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, staring out at the glowing city. What if I'm making his life harder? What if by leaning on him, I'm breaking him too? The questions twisted in her mind like knives. The next morning, a new storm hit. A magazine published photographs of them by the lake, the one place they thought was private. Someone had followed them, captured their escape, and now splashed it across pages with cruel captions. Secret lovers hiding from the world. Midnight getaway. The pictures showed Sandra's tear-stained face, Keanu's calm silhouette by the water. But the truth behind those photos was invisible to the world. Sandra's hands shook as she held the magazine. "They took even this from us," she whispered. Keanu looked at the pictures quietly. Then he said, "We can't erase what they see, but we can hold on to what we know is real. They don't own our truth, Sandra. We do." Yet the weight of it all was crushing. Friends called with worried voices, managers warned about damaged reputations, studios whispered about delays and contracts. Sandra and Keanu suddenly felt not just like two souls fighting grief, but like two targets being cornered by the world's hunger for stories. And then, the breaking point came. One evening, as they walked out of a small restaurant, hoping for just a quiet meal, they were ambushed by a swarm of cameras. Voices screamed questions, flashes blinded their eyes, and people pushed closer and closer. In the chaos, someone shouted cruel words about Sandra's grief, mocking her pain, twisting it into gossip. She froze, her chest locked. For a moment, she felt the world close in, and she couldn't breathe. Keanu stepped forward, his jaw tight. For the first time, he raised his voice. "Enough!" His tone was not angry, but firm, powerful, carrying years of unspoken pain. The crowd went silent for a heartbeat, stunned by his sudden outburst. He turned, took Sandra's hand, and guided her through the crowd, shielding her with his body until they reached safety. Once inside the car, Sandra trembled, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Why do they hate me?" she whispered. Keanu shook his head. "They don't hate you. They don't even see you. They see headlines, stories, illusions. But I see you. I see the real you. And I won't let them break that." His words steadied her heart, but deep down, she knew they were reaching a line. She couldn't bear to watch him fight this storm forever. And as the car drove away, her thoughts twisted into one terrifying question. What if the only way to protect him is to let him go? The night ended with silence between them. Not the peaceful silence they once shared, but a heavy one, filled with unspoken fears. Sandra lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if tomorrow would force her to make the hardest decision of her life, because love, whether spoken or unspoken, is not only about holding on. Sometimes, it is about choosing when to let go. The choice that changed everything. The night after the ambush at the restaurant, Sandra lay awake in bed, her mind restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blinding flashes, heard the cruel voices, and felt the weight of Keanu's hand gripping hers as he shielded her from the chaos. He had always been her anchor, her strength in silence, but now she feared she was pulling him into a storm he didn't deserve. Her heart whispered a question she had tried to avoid. Am I saving myself while breaking him? By morning, she had made a decision. When Keanu arrived, as he always did, with his quiet calm, she asked him to sit. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Keanu, you've done more for me than I could ever thank you for, but maybe the kindest thing you can do now is walk away. I don't want you to suffer because of me. I don't want the world to destroy the peace you've built for yourself." His eyes darkened with sadness, but not surprise. He sat in silence for a long time, letting her words hang in the air. Finally, he said softly, "Sandra, do you really think leaving will stop the storm? The cameras will move on, yes. The whispers will fade. But your grief won't disappear because I step aside. And mine won't either. We've both lost so much in our lives. Maybe the only way we heal is not by hiding, but by facing it together." Her tears spilled over. "But I don't want to be your burden." Keanu leaned closer, his voice steady and sure. "You're not a burden. You're a reminder that kindness matters, even in the darkest moments. You're proof that carrying someone else's pain can make both of us stronger. Don't ask me to walk away, Sandra, because I won't." His words broke through the walls she had built inside. For weeks she had feared that her grief made her weak, that leaning on someone else would only bring more pain. But now she saw the truth. Kindness was not weakness, and love, even if unspoken, was not a burden. It was a bridge. Still, the storm outside had not ended. The world still buzzed with stories, with lies, with noise. But something changed that day. Instead of hiding, Sandra and Keanu chose to step into the light together. A week later, they appeared side by side at a public event, not as actors selling a movie, not as celebrities chasing headlines, but as two human beings carrying truth. The reporters swarmed, the cameras flashed, but this time Sandra didn't flinch. She raised her hand for silence, her voice calm but strong. "I know many of you have written your own version of our story, but I want you to hear mine. Grief is not a scandal. Loss is not gossip. It is something every human being will face. I am learning day by day that it does not destroy us. It reshapes us. I am grateful to have friends who remind me of this. And to anyone watching, I want you to know, you are not alone in your pain. You are not broken. You are still whole, even when it feels impossible." The room grew still. Some cameras lowered, some reporters softened their eyes. Her words carried more than pain. They carried truth, and truth has a way of piercing through even the loudest noise. Keanu stood silently at her side, his steady presence saying everything without words. The world, for once, seemed to see them, not as headlines, but as people. In the days that followed, the gossip didn't vanish, but something else grew louder. Voices of people inspired by Sandra's courage. Messages poured in from strangers who had lost loved ones, who had carried grief silently, who now felt less alone because she dared to speak. And through it all, Keanu remained, steady as ever, walking beside her in both silence and storms. One evening. Weeks later, they returned to the lake. This time, no cameras followed. No one stole the moment. They sat side by side in the grass, the moonlight glowing across the water. "Do you regret it?" Sandra asked softly. "Facing all of this with me?" Keanu looked at her, his expression calm, his eyes filled with quiet strength. "No, because some storms are worth walking through, if it means reaching the other side with someone who understands." Sandra leaned back, her heart lighter then. It had been in months. She realized she no longer felt like she was drowning. The grief was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a weight she carried alone. It was something shared, softened by kindness, made bearable by presence. And as the night stretched on, one truth became clear. The story the paparazzi thought they were chasing had never been about romance or scandal. It was about something far greater. It was about resilience, about humility, about the kind of kindness that expects nothing and gives everything. The world had captured their faces, but only they knew the truth of what lived behind them. And sometimes, the greatest stories are not the ones told by cameras, but the ones lived quietly, bravely, and with love that doesn't need words.